The pill bottle slipped from her trembling fingers. Time seemed to slow as the orange plastic container tumbled through the air, end over end, scattering white tablets across the polished hospital floor like snowflakes against asphalt. Aria Blackwell dropped to her knees immediately, dirty blonde hair falling loose from its already messy bun, shoulders hunching forward as if trying to make her 5'5" frame even smaller. The fluorescent lights overhead were merciless. They cast harsh shadows under her storm gray eyes, making the dark circles beneath them look like bruises. Her medium blue scrubs hung loose on her body, deliberately oversized, the V-neck top and short sleeves doing nothing to suggest the lean muscle hidden underneath. She looked exactly like what she wanted everyone to see, a nervous, incompetent nurse who had no business working in a hospital. But beneath that carefully constructed facade, in the space between heartbeats, something else flickered. Her hands, those allegedly trembling, unreliable hands, moved with precision as they collected the scattered pills. Each movement economical, efficient, the movements of someone who had performed tasks under far worse conditions than a clean hospital corridor. The elastic band on her right wrist caught the light as she worked. She snapped it once, twice. A coping mechanism, a reminder to stay in character. Unbelievable! The voice cut through the quiet corridor like a scalpel through skin. Dr. Preston Sterling stood at the nurse's station, 6 feet of perfectly groomed authority in a pristine white coat that practically glowed under the lights. His dark hair was styled with a kind of precision that suggested he spent more time in front of a mirror than most people spent sleeping. The expensive TAG Heuer watch on his wrist caught the light as he gestured dismissively toward her. "This is the 3rd time this week, Blackwell." His voice carried down the corridor, intentionally loud enough for everyone to hear. "Do you have any idea what those medications cost? Or is basic competence too much to ask from our night shift?" Aria kept her head down, fingers still trembling, deliberately now, as she picked up the last pill. Her hospital ID badge swung from its basic lanyard. The scar above her left eyebrow, 3 centimeters long, partially hidden by loose strands of hair, caught the light for just a moment before she ducked her head lower. "I'm sorry, Dr. Sterling." Her voice came out soft, apologetic, with just the right amount of shakiness. "It won't happen again." "That's what you said last time." He stepped closer, expensive Italian dress shoes stopping inches from where she crouched on the floor. 2 other nurses had paused in the hallway, Diane Mitchell from the day shift and Sarah from pediatrics. Both wore expressions of barely concealed amusement. This was entertainment for them, the nightly show of watching Aria Blackwell fail at the most basic nursing tasks. "You know what?" Sterling's voice took on a tone of mock concern. "Stay there. Don't get up yet. I want you to think about how much you're costing this hospital while you're down there on your knees, where you apparently belong." Something flickered in Aria's eyes, there and gone in an instant, like lightning behind storm clouds. Her jaw tightened, microscopically, barely visible. The small scars on the backs of her hands, remnants of shrapnel from another life, caught the light as her fingers momentarily stopped shaking and curled into fists. In that frozen moment, trained reflexes threatened to take over. Her body wanted to move, to stand, to defend, to demonstrate exactly what those hands were capable of when they weren't pretending to tremble. She could have Dr. Sterling on his back in 2 seconds flat, could have him secured and immobile in 4, could make him understand that respect wasn't something you demanded, it was something you earned. But that wasn't who Aria Blackwell was supposed to be. So the moment passed. Her shoulders curved forward again, her head dropped lower, and the tremor returned to her hands as she carefully placed the pills back into the container. "Yes, doctor." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. "Pathetic," Sterling shook his head, addressing the watching nurses now. "This is what happens when hospitals start hiring based on sympathy rather than skill. She's probably here because some veteran preference program forced HR's hand." He turned his attention back to Arya. Isn't that right, Blackwell? What was it? Desk duty for the army? Filing paperwork at some base in Kansas? He laughed. The other nurses joined in, their voices echoing off the sterile walls. I can't imagine you doing anything that actually mattered. Arya stood slowly, keeping her eyes down, arms close to her body. The elastic band had left a slight indentation in her pale skin. She snapped it once more, the quiet sound lost under Sterling's continued commentary. I'll dispose of these properly and get new medications, Dr. Sterling. See that you do. And Blackwell? He leaned in slightly, voice dropping just enough that only she could hear the malice underneath. Try not to kill anyone tonight with your incompetence. We've got a full ER, and I don't need to waste time cleaning up after you. He turned on his heel, white coat billowing dramatically behind him, and strode away down the corridor. The watching nurses dispersed, whispering and giggling. Arya stood motionless for a long moment, staring at the medication container in her trembling hands. Through the window to her left, she could see the parking lot. 3 a.m. at St. Michael VA Hospital in Fort Worth, Texas. The night was quiet, peaceful. Exactly the kind of environment she'd been seeking for the past 2 years. 2 years since Afghanistan. 2 years since the explosion. 2 years since she'd held Lieutenant Kara Sullivan in her arms and felt the life drain out of her best friend while the smell of burning fuel and flesh filled the air. 2 years of running from who she used to be. Arya moved toward the medication disposal unit, her white nursing shoes making almost no sound on the tile floor. Her steps were deliberately small, shuffling, hesitant, every movement calculated to appear uncertain, to blend into the background, to be forgettable. The night shift at St. Michael VA Hospital was usually quiet, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly routine cases, occasional intoxicated patients, minor injuries. She preferred it that way, fewer people to interact with, fewer chances to slip up, fewer opportunities for someone to see past the mask she'd been wearing for 8 months. 8 months of careful performance. 8 months of letting them think she was nothing more than a mediocre nurse with shaky hands and low self-esteem. It was easier that way, safer. She disposed of the pills properly, documenting the waste in the computer system. Her handwriting in the electronic chart was neat despite the apparent tremor in her hands. The documentation was perfect, something that had initially confused Dr. Sterling until he decided she probably just copied someone else's format. He never looked closely enough to see how precise her medical assessments actually were, how her trauma evaluations were consistently accurate even when her delivery seemed uncertain. Rough night? The voice behind her was kind. Dr. Michael Torres, one of the ER physicians who actually treated staff with respect. He was in his 50s, with gray streaks in his black hair and smile lines around his eyes. A good doctor, a decent man, one of the few people in this hospital who had never mocked her. Arya glanced up briefly, managing a small, apologetic smile. Just clumsy, Dr. Torres. Nothing new. Torres leaned against the counter, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. There was something in his eyes, curiosity mixed with concern. Sterling is an ass, he said quietly, checking to make sure they were alone. Don't let him get to you. I've seen your patient notes. You're better than he gives you credit for. He paused, choosing his words carefully. Actually, you're better than most of the nurses on day shift. Your assessments are always spot on, even if you don't seem confident about them. Something shifted in Arya's posture, a microsecond of straightening, of pride, before she caught herself and hunched forward again. Thank you, Dr. Torres. That means a lot. He studied her for a moment longer, something curious in his expression, as if he was trying to solve a puzzle. But then his pager went off, the sharp beep cutting through the quiet. Incoming trauma, MVA with ejection, ETA 5 minutes. Can you set up Bay 3? Of course. Arya moved immediately toward the trauma bay. Her steps were still small and hesitant to anyone watching, but her hands had already begun their mental preparation. Motor vehicle accident with ejection meant high-velocity trauma, likely head injury, possible internal bleeding, chest trauma, spine injury until proven otherwise. She'd seen hundreds of these cases, had treated them under mortar fire, in the backs of moving vehicles, in conditions that would make this pristine American emergency room look like a luxury resort. But Torres and the others couldn't know that. No one could know that. She began preparing the trauma bay with practiced efficiency, though she made sure to fumble occasionally with equipment, to hesitate just long enough to maintain her cover. Another nurse, Jessica from day shift pulling a double, watched her with barely concealed impatience. "God, Blackwell, just let me do it," Jessica huffed, taking an IV kit from her hands. "Why are you even assigned to trauma? You should be in the clinic or something." "Sorry," Arya murmured, stepping back, making herself small again. Inside, part of her was calculating. MVA with ejection, high likelihood of head trauma, internal bleeding, possibly tension pneumothorax if there was chest impact. The survival rate depended on the response time, the quality of pre-hospital care, the speed of definitive treatment. She'd saved dozens of patients like this, had performed emergency procedures in situations where hesitation meant death, had earned her call sign, Valkyrie, by being the one who decided who lived and who died on the battlefield. But Jessica didn't need to know that. No one here did. The ambulance arrived with sirens wailing. Paramedics rushed in with the patient, a man in his 20s, unconscious, obvious head trauma, breathing labored. The young veteran's face was covered in blood, his chest rising and falling unevenly. Torres started calling orders immediately, the trauma team moving with practiced efficiency. Arya stayed in the background, fetching supplies when asked, doing the simple tasks, keeping her hands visibly shaky, staying out of the way. But her eyes never stopped moving, scanning the monitors, watching the patient's vitals, noting the asymmetric chest rise, left side not expanding properly, possible pneumothorax. Torres hadn't caught it yet. He was focused on the head injury, calling for a CT scan. The patient's oxygen saturation was dropping. 94, 92, 90. Arya's hands clenched at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to intervene. One simple procedure, needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, 14-gauge angiocath, 15 seconds and she could fix it. But that would raise questions. That would make them look at her differently. That would threaten everything she'd built here, the safe, invisible life she'd carved out for herself. The patient's O2 sat hit 88. His lips were starting to turn blue. "Dr. Torres," Arya said quietly, her voice barely audible over the organized chaos. "I think..." He didn't hear her. She tried again, slightly louder, forcing herself to sound uncertain. "Dr. Torres, I think... maybe... his left chest isn't moving right." Torres glanced up, initially irritated at the interruption. But then he looked at the patient. Really looked. His eyes widened. "Damn, decreased breath sounds on the left side. Tracheal deviation." His hands moved to the patient's neck, feeling for the anatomical landmarks. "Tension pneumothorax. Get me a needle decompression kit. Now!" Jessica ran for the kit while Torres positioned himself. Arya stayed back, watching with a carefully neutral expression as Torres performed the procedure she could have done faster, cleaner, with one hand tied behind her back. The hiss of escaping air, the immediate improvement in the patient's breathing, the oxygen saturation climbing back up. Torres had done it correctly. He was a good doctor. But it had taken him 90 seconds from recognition to intervention. She could have done it in 15. How many seconds had that patient been without adequate oxygen? How much brain damage had occurred in those 75 seconds of delay? "Good catch, Blackwell," Torres said over his shoulder, genuine surprise evident in his voice. "That could have been bad." "Just lucky," Arya mumbled, looking at her feet. Jessica shot her a skeptical glance but said nothing. The rest of the trauma was routine. Stabilize, CT scan, transfer to ICU. Arya cleaned up the bay afterward, her movements slow and methodical, maintaining her clumsy persona even though her mind was racing. That had been close, too close. She'd almost intervened directly, almost blown her cover over one patient when she'd maintained it for 8 months specifically to avoid moments like this. She was restocking a supply closet when she heard it. The sound froze her in place, one hand still reaching for a box of gauze. Distant but distinct, growing louder. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors. Heavy rotors, military heavy. Arya's entire body went rigid, every muscle locked. Her breathing stopped, her vision tunneled. For 3 seconds, she wasn't in a hospital supply closet in Fort Worth, Texas. She was in Afghanistan, in the dark, the smell of burning fuel in her nostrils, the heat of flames on her face, Kara's blood on her hands. "Valkyrie, we have to go. The fuel tank's going to blow." "I can't leave her. I can't." "She's gone. We have to." The memory shattered as reality reasserted itself. Arya gasped, one hand flying to the wall to steady herself. The elastic band on her wrist snapped 3 times in rapid succession, the small pain grounding her back in the present. She moved to the window with steps that had nothing to do with her shuffling nurse persona. Her stride was longer now, purposeful, the gait of someone who had covered hostile terrain under fire. There, cutting through the darkness, running lights bright against the night sky, was the unmistakable silhouette of a UH-60 Blackhawk approaching fast and low. That wasn't a medevac helicopter. That was a military bird, and it was coming here. Arya's hands curled into fists, nails digging into palms. The scars on her knuckles, small white lines from shrapnel that had torn through her skin 2 years ago, seemed to burn. The Black Hawk descended toward the hospital's helipad, rotors churning the air with that distinctive sound that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The sound that meant mission, danger, death. Something stirred deep in her chest, something she'd been suppressing for 2 years, something she'd hoped she could keep buried forever. The sound of those rotors brought back memories she didn't want, faces she'd lost, decisions she'd made, a life she'd walked away from. Whatever was in that helicopter, whatever was about to come through those emergency room doors, was going to change everything. Arya Blackwell forced her shoulders to hunch forward again, forced the tremor back into her hands, forced herself to become small and invisible once more. But this time it felt like a lie, even to herself. The rotors grew louder, closer. The night shift was about to get very, very complicated. The Black Hawk touched down on the hospital's rooftop helipad with practiced precision, its rotors creating a downwash that rattled windows and set off car alarms in the parking lot below. Through the window, Arya watched as the side door slid open before the skids had fully settled. Figures emerged, moving with the coordinated efficiency of operators who had done this 1,000 times. 4 men. No, 5. All massive, all armed, all moving with a purpose that made every civilian security guard in the vicinity take an instinctive step backward. Even from a distance, even in the dim lighting, Arya could identify the gear. Multicam plate carriers, HK-416 rifles with suppressors and optics, high-cut ballistic helmets, tactical headsets. But it was the way they moved that told her everything she needed to know. These weren't just soldiers. These were operators, Navy SEALs. Her former life had just walked through the door. What the hell? Jessica appeared beside her, staring up at the rooftop. Is that the military? Are we being invaded or something? I don't know, Arya murmured, but her hands had stopped shaking. Her blue-gray gaze tracked every movement as the SEALs moved toward the rooftop access door, 2 of them carrying a stretcher between them. Even from here, she could see the dark stains on the tactical gear of the man on the stretcher. Blood, a lot of it, Dr. Sterling emerged from his office, irritation written across his perfect features. What's all the noise about? Torres, do you know anything about? He stopped mid-sentence as the rooftop access door burst open and the SEALs entered the ER, bringing with them the smell of gunpowder, sweat, and blood. The man in the lead was enormous, 6'4" at least, probably 240 pounds of solid muscle, barely contained by his coyote brown tactical pants and tan t-shirt. His plate carrier was loaded with magazines, medical supplies, and communications equipment. A tactical beard, the kind that had become the unofficial uniform of special operations, covered his jaw. Even in the fluorescent hospital lighting, Arya could see the scar cutting through his right eyebrow. His eyes swept the ER with the alertness of someone who had survived too many ambushes to ever be caught off guard. Around his neck, visible against his tan shirt, hung a SEAL trident on a chain. "We need a doctor. Now!" His voice carried an officer's authority that made people move without thinking. "Critical GSW to the chest. Possible tension pneumothorax. Lost a lot of blood. He's been stable for transport, but he's deteriorating." Dr. Sterling stepped forward, his earlier irritation replaced by professional concern. Though Arya could see him straightening his white coat, smoothing his hair, even now worried about appearance. "I'm Dr. Preston Sterling, attending physician. Trauma Bay 1. What's the patient's?" "His name's classified," the lead SEAL cut him off. Not rudely, but with absolute finality. "What you need to know: gunshot wound to the right upper chest. Entry wound only, bullet still lodged. Packed with combat gauze, pressure dressing applied 20 minutes ago. He's had about 4 units of blood in him. Probably needs more. No allergies. Blood type O negative." He paused, ice blue eyes fixing on Sterling with an intensity that made the doctor actually take a step back. "Now, can we move?" They were already moving, carrying the stretcher toward Trauma Bay 1, not waiting for permission. The other SEALs fanned out automatically, taking up positions that gave them clear sight lines of all entrances. They weren't just securing the patient, they were securing the entire emergency room. Arya recognized the pattern immediately. These men expected trouble to follow them. The patient on the stretcher was younger, maybe early 30s, with the same athletic build as his teammates. His tactical gear had been partially cut away to access the wound, revealing a compression bandage dark with blood. His face was pale, lips slightly blue, breathing rapid and shallow. Arya's trained eye assessed him in seconds. Significant blood loss, possible developing tension pneumothorax despite the combat gauze. Tachycardic, likely going into shock. She found herself following toward the trauma bay, staying in the background as always, but unable to look away. Jessica and Torres joined them, along with another nurse named Marcus. The room filled quickly, too quickly, with the 4 medically trained hospital staff and 5 heavily armed SEALs who refused to leave their teammate. "I need you all to step back," Sterling said, addressing the SEALs with the kind of tone he probably thought projected authority. "This is a sterile environment, and you're contaminating it. Wait outside." The lead SEAL didn't even acknowledge him. He moved to the head of the stretcher, one hand on his teammate's shoulder. "Hawk to Nomad, stay with me, brother. You're home. These docs are going to fix you up." His call sign was Hawk. Arya's breath caught in her throat. She knew that call sign, knew that voice. Petty Officer Jackson Rivers, SEAL Team 3, her old unit. As the SEALs moved past with their wounded teammate, Arya noticed something odd. Dr. Sterling had pulled out his phone, typing rapidly, his face pale. He glanced up, caught her watching, and quickly pocketed the device. "Just notifying administration about the military presence," he said, his voice tight. Arya said nothing, but filed the observation away. In her experience, innocent people didn't look that nervous when caught texting. "Sir, I really must insist," Sterling started. "Then insist quietly while you work." Hawk cut him off again. his blue eyes fixing on Sterling with an intensity that made the doctor actually step back. "We don't leave our brothers. You do your job, we'll stay out of your way, but we're not leaving." Sterling's jaw tightened, but he turned to the patient, pulling on gloves. "Fine, someone get me vitals. I need portable x-ray, blood work, and—" "Blood pressure 70/40 and dropping," Torres called out, watching the monitor. "Heart rate 140. Respiratory rate 32. Oxygen saturation 89%. Arya stayed near the supply cabinet, her assigned position, her hands clasped in front of her in their usual trembling grip. But her eyes never left the patient. She watched Sterling examine the wound, saw him peel back the combat gauze carefully. The bullet had entered just below the right clavicle, probably missed the subclavian artery, or the patient would already be dead. But there was still significant bleeding. The trajectory suggested possible lung involvement. "The bullet's still in there," Sterling said, more to himself than anyone else. "We'll need to get him to surgery for extraction. In the meantime, we need to stabilize—" The patient's oxygen saturation alarm went off. 85%. 82. Arya's entire body went rigid. She knew that sound, knew what it meant. Her gaze fixed on the patient's chest with the laser focus of someone who had been trained to recognize these signs in the dark, under fire, with people dying around her. The right side was rising normally, but the left side wasn't moving as much as it should. The trachea was starting to deviate to the right, jugular vein distension becoming visible in the neck, tension pneumothorax. The lung had collapsed. Air was building up in the chest cavity with nowhere to go, putting pressure on the heart and great vessels. If it wasn't decompressed immediately, he would arrest within minutes. Her hands stopped shaking completely. They curled into fists at her sides, nails digging into palms hard enough to draw blood. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to move, to act, to fix it. She had done this procedure hundreds of times, had performed it in the back of moving vehicles under fire, had taught it to dozens of combat medics. 14-gauge angiocath, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. Insert until you hear the hiss of escaping air. 15 seconds, maybe 20. She could save his life, but she couldn't move, couldn't reveal herself, couldn't throw away 8 months of careful cover for one patient, no matter how much every instinct screamed at her to act. "Dr. Sterling," Torres's voice was urgent. "Decreased breath sounds on the left. Tracheal deviation, JVD. He's got a tension pneumothorax." "I can see that," Sterling snapped, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. His hands weren't as steady as they should be. "Where's the needle decompression kit?" "Top drawer, left side," Jessica said, but she was across the room, and in her rush to get it, she knocked over an IV pole. It crashed to the floor with a clatter that made everyone jump. 80% oxygen saturation. 78. Hawk's voice cut through the chaos, deadly calm. "Doc, my brother is dying. Fix it. Now." Sterling's hands were shaking as he finally got the kit open. He positioned the needle, trying to find the landmark. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. But his hands weren't steady. He had done this procedure maybe 5 times in his career, always in controlled conditions, never on someone who was actively dying. 75%. The patient's lips were turning blue. Arya's vision narrowed to a tunnel. Her breathing slowed, controlled, automatic. Combat breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out. Her hands were completely steady now, hanging at her sides, ready. She took 1 step forward, then caught herself. She couldn't do this. If she intervened, if she showed what she really was, everything she had built would collapse. They would start asking questions. They would dig into her background. They would figure out who she really was. And then the past she had been running from for 2 years would catch up to her. 72%. The monitor was screaming now. Dr. Sterling inserted the needle, but his angle was wrong. too medial, not lateral enough. He would miss the intercostal space entirely, might even hit the internal mammary artery. Arya could see it happening, could predict the exact moment he would realize his mistake. "Damn it," Sterling muttered, pulling the needle back. "I need to." The patient's eyes rolled back. His body went limp. "He's arresting," Torres shouted. "Starting compressions." Arya moved. She didn't think about it, didn't plan it, didn't make a conscious choice. Her body simply moved with ingrained instinct. 2 decades of combat medicine overriding conscious thought, crossing the space to the trauma bay in 4 long strides that were nothing like her usual shuffling steps. Her hands shot out and grabbed a fresh needle decompression kit from the supply cart without looking. Her movements precise and economical. "Move." The word came out in a voice that didn't sound like the trembling nurse they all knew. This was battlefield authority. The voice of someone who had led operators into hostile territory. The voice of someone who had made life-and-death decisions under fire. "Doctor." Sterling actually stepped back, shocked into compliance by the sheer command in that single word. Arya's hands, perfectly steady, not even a hint of tremor, ripped open the kit. Her eyes were focused with surgical precision on the patient's chest. She didn't need to feel for landmarks, she could see them. The anatomy was visible in her mind like an X-ray overlay. Second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, left side. Her fingers found the spot in 1 second. The 14-gauge angiocath was positioned in another second. She inserted it with controlled force, 45-degree angle, advancing until she felt the subtle pop of penetrating the pleura. The hiss of escaping air was immediate and dramatic. The patient's oxygen saturation began climbing. 75, 78, 82. His chest began rising symmetrically. His color started improving. The entire trauma bay was silent, except for the steady beeping of the monitor and the hiss of air still escaping through the angiocath. Arya stood over the patient, her hands still on the needle, her posture completely different from the hunched, submissive stance everyone was used to. Her shoulders were back, spine straight, head up. She was taller somehow. Her small frame radiated a presence that filled the room. The dirty, blonde hair that had been falling messily around her face was pushed back, revealing her eyebrow scar clearly for the first time. Her storm gray eyes were sharp and alert, scanning the monitors, assessing the patient with professional efficiency. She looked nothing like the incompetent, nervous nurse they all knew. She looked like a soldier. And in the corner of the room, Petty Officer Jackson Hawk Rivers stared at her with recognition dawning in his eyes. "Valkyrie?" he whispered. The word hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Arya's eyes met his. For one frozen moment, the mask was completely gone. He could see who she really was, what she really was, and there was no taking it back. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded like Lieutenant Kara Sullivan whispered what she had known all along. "You can hide from your past, Valkyrie, but you can't hide from who you are. Not forever. Not when it counts." The silence in Trauma Bay 1 stretched for exactly 4 seconds before Dr. Preston Sterling found his voice. "What the hell did you just—" He stared at Arya, at the perfectly placed needle decompression, at the patient's rising oxygen saturation, at the complete transformation of the woman who had been dropping medication cups just 2 hours ago. "How did you— You're not authorized to perform that procedure. That's a physician-level intervention. You're a nurse, Blackwell. What were you thinking?" Arya didn't answer immediately. Her hands remained on the angiocath, monitoring it, making sure it stayed in position. Her gaze tracked the monitors with the focus of someone who had spent years reading vital signs in situations far more chaotic than this pristine emergency room. Oxygen saturation now at 91% and climbing. Heart rate decreasing from 140 to 120. Blood pressure stabilizing at 85/50. Better, but not good. He still needed surgery. Still needed blood, still needed intensive care, but he wasn't dying anymore. Thinking I didn't want to watch someone die when I could prevent it, she said finally. Her voice was still steady, controlled, not apologetic, not uncertain, just factual. Torres was staring at her like he had never seen her before. Blackwell, that was perfect placement. First try. I've seen attending physicians take 3 or 4 attempts. How did you? Does it matter? Arya cut him off, finally looking up from the patient. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the shocked expressions of the hospital staff, the calculating stares of the SEALs. She could feel her carefully constructed cover disintegrating in real time, could see the questions forming in everyone's minds. 8 months of hiding, gone in 15 seconds. Hawk had moved closer during the procedure. He now stood less than 3 feet from her, his 6'4" frame towering over her 5'5" height. But Arya didn't step back or hunch her shoulders like she normally would. She held her ground, maintaining eye contact with a man who had seen more combat than most people could imagine. That was a combat insertion, Hawk said quietly, his blue eyes studying her face with an intensity that made the other hospital staff uncomfortable. Angle, depth, speed. That wasn't textbook medicine. That was field procedure, battlefield medicine. He paused, his gaze dropping to her hands, to the small scars on the backs of them, marks she normally kept hidden, but which were now clearly visible under the harsh lights. "Where'd you learn to do that, ma'am?" The question hung in the air. Everyone was waiting for her answer. Arya could feel the weight of their attention, the scrutiny, the curiosity that would unravel everything if she didn't control this situation. But before she could respond, Sterling had recovered from his initial shock and was working himself into indignant fury. "This is completely unacceptable, Blackwell. You've just violated about a dozen hospital protocols. You're not a physician. You don't have the authority or the training to perform invasive procedures. I'm going to have to report this to administration. You can expect..." "Administration can wait until after my brother's stable." Hawk's interruption was calm, but carried an edge of steel underneath. He didn't look at Sterling, kept his eyes on Arya. "Right now, I want to know who just saved his life. Because whoever taught you that procedure, whoever trained you to move like that," he gestured at her, at the way she was standing, the way she held herself. "They didn't teach you that in nursing school." "I think we should focus on the patient," Arya said, but her voice was quieter now, some of the command authority fading as she realized how exposed she had become. She tried to make herself smaller, tried to hunch her shoulders forward again, but it looked forced now. The mask had slipped too far to put back on easily. Torres was still processing, his medical mind working through the evidence. "Your hands didn't shake once, Blackwell. Your hands always shake. It's one of your..." He stopped, understanding dawning on his face. It was an act. The trembling, the nervousness, the dropping things. It was all an act. Jessica spoke up from her position by the monitors, her voice a mix of confusion and anger. "Why would you pretend to be incompetent? We've all been covering for you for months, taking on extra work because we thought you were struggling. Were you just, what, laughing at us? Making fools of us?" "No." The word came out harder than Arya intended, sharp enough to make Jessica flinch. She took a breath, forced her voice to soften. "I never wanted anyone to cover for me. I never asked for that. I just wanted..." She stopped herself, the vulnerability in her voice surprising everyone, including herself. "I just wanted to be left alone." "Well, that ship has sailed," Sterling snapped. "You can't pull off something like this and expect everyone to just forget about it. I want answers, Blackwell. Who are you really? What are you doing in my ER, pretending to be something you're not?" One of the other SEALs spoke up for the first time, a younger operator, maybe early 30s, with a tactical beard and intelligent brown eyes. "Hawk, we need to move Nomad to surgery. He's stable enough for transport now, but that bullet needs to come out and we need to get real blood into him." Hawk nodded but didn't take his eyes off Arya. Agreed. Torres, can you handle that? Yes, Torres said immediately. I'll call surgery, get a room prepped, notify the blood bank. We'll take good care of him. I know you will. Hawk's tone made it clear that failure wasn't an option. Then he turned fully to Arya, and when he spoke, his voice was pitched low enough that only she and maybe Torres could hear. We need to talk. After he's out of surgery, there are some things I need to know. I don't have anything to say to you, Arya said, but even she could hear how weak it sounded. Ma'am, with all due respect. Hawk's eyes dropped to the scars on her hands again, then to her eyebrow scar, then back to her face. I think you have a lot to say, and I think I need to hear it, especially if what I'm thinking is correct. What are you thinking? Arya asked against her better judgment. Hawk studied her for a long moment before answering. I'm thinking that I know maybe a dozen people in the entire world who could have performed that procedure that fast, that clean, under that much pressure. And all of them are either currently serving or recently retired from the military. Special operations medicine, combat medic training, probably 18 Delta qualification or higher. He paused, letting the words sink in. Which means you're not just some nurse who happened to learn a trick. You're trained, really trained. Arya's jaw tightened. She didn't confirm or deny, but her silence was answer enough. Sterling was listening now, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. What are you talking about? Special operations? Blackwell is just a nurse. She has a civilian nursing degree, passed her boards, has a regular license. I've seen her personnel file. Personnel files can be scrubbed, one of the other SEALs said quietly, especially for people who need to disappear. Disappear from what? Jessica demanded. What is going on? Torres was putting pieces together, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding. The way you assess patients, Blackwell, your documentation is always perfect. Trauma assessments that read like combat casualty reports. The terminology you use sometimes, military abbreviations, I only recognize because I did a rotation with the VA. And you always assess C-spine first, even on patients with zero indication of spinal trauma. That's battlefield protocol, not civilian ER procedure. A lot of nurses have military backgrounds, Arya said, but she could hear how defensive she sounded. Not like yours, Hawk said. He glanced at his team, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Then he looked back at Arya, and there was something almost like respect in his eyes. Look, I don't know your story. I don't know why you're hiding or what you're running from, but my brother's alive because of you, and that means something to me. He paused. So I'm going to make you an offer. When he's out of surgery and stable, you and I are going to have a conversation, a real one. And depending on what you tell me, maybe I can help you. Or maybe I'll just say thank you and walk away. But either way, you don't have to keep pretending anymore. Not with us. I don't need your help, Arya said, but her voice cracked slightly on the last word. Maybe not, Hawk acknowledged, but you saved one of my men. That creates a debt, and SEALs pay their debts. Before Arya could respond, the trauma bay doors burst open, and two orderlies arrived with a transport gurney, ready to move Nomad to surgery. The moment of intensity broke as everyone shifted back into medical mode. Torres coordinated the transfer, calling out orders, making sure all the monitors and IV lines were properly secured for transport. The SEALs moved with the gurney, refusing to leave their teammate, their presence creating a bubble of contained violence in the sterile hospital corridor. Sterling waited until they were gone before rounding on Arya, his face flushed with anger. My office, now. We're going to have a very serious discussion about your future employment at this hospital. Doctor, Sterling, he stormed off, leaving Arya standing in the middle of the trauma bay, suddenly alone except for Torres and Jessica. Jessica was still processing, her expression caught between anger and confusion. I don't understand any of this. Who are you, really? I'm exactly who I said I was, Arya said quietly, some of the vulnerability creeping back into her voice. I'm a nurse, I'm licensed. Everything in my personnel file is legitimate. She paused, struggling with the words. A glimpse of whatever she had been running from, whatever had driven her to hide her true self for 8 months. But then she locked it down, the professional mask sliding back into place. I need to go talk to Dr. Sterling, she said, not answering the question. He's right about one thing. I did violate protocol. I knew the risks when I did it. I'll accept the consequences. Blackwell, Torres started, but she was already walking away. Her stride was somewhere between the shuffling, hesitant steps she normally used and the confident military bearing she had shown in the trauma bay. Like she couldn't quite decide which version of herself to be anymore. Torres and Jessica watched her go. After a moment, Jessica said quietly, "Did we ever actually know her at all?" "I don't think so," Torres admitted. "But I think maybe we're about to find out." Diplomas covering one wall, expensive furniture, a desk that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. He sat behind it now, fingers steepled, his perfect hair somehow still immaculate despite the chaos of the last hour. Arya stood in front of the desk, hands clasped, trying to decide which version of herself to present. The trembling, apologetic nurse, or the competent operator who had just saved a man's life. "Sit," Sterling commanded, gesturing to the chair across from him. Arya remained standing. "I'd prefer not to." His eyebrows rose. "That wasn't a request, Blackwell." "I know." Something in her voice made him pause. She wasn't being defiant exactly, but she wasn't being submissive either. "You're going to fire me regardless of whether I'm sitting or standing, so I'll stand." Sterling leaned back in his chair, studying her with an expression somewhere between anger and curiosity. "You're right. I am going to fire you. What you did tonight was reckless, unauthorized, and potentially opens this hospital to massive liability. You performed a procedure that only physicians are authorized to perform. You've been lying about your capabilities for months, and frankly, I have no idea who you actually are." "My credentials are legitimate," Arya said quietly. "Registered nurse, current license, passed all required boards. I didn't lie about my qualifications." "No, you just hid them," Sterling countered. "Which brings me to my question. Why? What kind of person deliberately makes themselves look incompetent? What are you hiding from, Blackwell? Or is that even your real name?" Arya's jaw tightened. "It's my real name. And what I'm hiding from is none of your concern." "It becomes my concern when it affects my ER," Sterling shot back. "Those SEALs think you're military. Special operations, they said. Is that true?" Before Arya could answer, the office door opened without a knock. But it wasn't Torres this time. A man stood in the doorway, late 60s, maybe 70, gray hair and a military buzz cut, tall frame with the kind of posture that came from decades of discipline. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left knee, but there was nothing weak about his presence. Colonel Tobias Brennan, hospital security consultant and administrator, retired Delta Force. Arya had seen him around the hospital for the past 8 months, had carefully avoided direct interaction, always staying out of his way, always making sure to be unremarkable when he was nearby. Because she had recognized him immediately. She had seen his picture before, years ago, in classified briefings, had heard stories about his operations in the Cold War era, had read after-action reports from missions he had led, and she had known, from the first moment she saw him, that if anyone in this hospital could recognize what she was, it would be him. "Dr. Sterling," Brennan said, his voice carrying the weight of authority despite his civilian clothes. "I need to speak with Nurse Blackwell. Privately." Sterling's face flushed. "Colonel Brennan, with all due respect, this is a personnel matter that is now a security matter," Brennan interrupted smoothly. "The presence of armed military personnel, a classified patient, and a potential threat to this facility all fall under my purview. I need to debrief Blackwell about what she observed during the incident in the trauma bay. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But it was delivered with such casual authority that Sterling couldn't easily refuse. "Fine," Sterling said tightly, "but we're not done, Blackwell. When the Colonel is finished with you, you come back here." Brennan gestured for Arya to follow him. She did, her mind racing. This was either very good or very bad. She couldn't decide which. They walked in silence down the corridor, past the nurses' station, toward the administrative wing. Brennan led her to a small conference room and closed the door behind them. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were sharp, assessing, the eyes of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people, identifying threats, making split-second decisions about who to trust. "Captain Arya Blackwell," he said finally. "Call sign Valkyrie, SEAL Team 3, first female SEAL to complete Bud/S and earn the Trident. Distinguished Service Cross for Valor in Afghanistan. 8 confirmed kills during Operation Nightfall. Medical specialist with 18 Delta qualification." He paused. "Killed in action 2 years ago during an IED attack that killed 8 members of her team. Full military honors. Flag-draped coffin. The works." Arya felt her chest tighten. Hearing it laid out like that, her life, her service, her supposed death, made it all feel surreal. "Except you're not dead," Brennan continued. "You're here, working night shift as a nurse, pretending to be incompetent, hiding from something. The question is, what?" "How long have you known?" Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks after you started," Brennan said. "I recognize your movement patterns, the way you clear a room with your eyes before entering, the way you position yourself with your back to walls, the way you assess threats automatically. I've spent 40 years in this business, Captain. I know an operator when I see one." He pulled out a chair and sat, gesturing for her to do the same. This time, she complied. "I made some calls," Brennan continued. "Very quiet calls to very discreet people. Found out about your file. Found out about Afghanistan. Found out about the accident that supposedly killed you." "It wasn't an accident," Arya said quietly. "It was an ambush. IED triggered on our convoy during exfil. Humvee hit, 8 KIA. I was thrown clear before the secondary explosion. The brass gave me a choice. Let the world think I died with my team, or come back and face the questions about why I survived when they didn't." "Survivor's guilt," Brennan said not unkindly. "I know it well." "It's more than that." Arya's hands clenched into fists on the table. "I was the team leader. I made the call to use that route. I assessed the intel and decided it was safe. 8 people died because of my decision, Colonel. 8 good operators. My best friend," her voice cracked, "Lieutenant Kara Sullivan. She was my spotter. We'd served together for 4 years. She died in that fire, and I couldn't save her." The room was quiet for a moment. Brennan's expression was understanding, but not pitying. "In 1983, I led an operation in Grenada," he said finally. "Delta Force Direct Action. We were supposed to extract some American students from a medical school before Cuban forces could get to them. I made the call to breach from the north entrance instead of the south. Intelligence said it was safer." He paused. 12 men died because that intelligence was wrong. 12 operators I had trained with, fought with, trusted with my life. They died because I made the wrong call." Arya looked up at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, pain that mirrored her own. "How do you live with it?" she asked. "With difficulty," Brennan admitted. "For 10 years I drank myself half to death, pushed away everyone who cared about me, blamed myself for every one of those deaths. It wasn't until a friend, another operator who had lost people, sat me down and told me the truth." "What truth?" "That the best way to honor the dead is to protect the living." Brennan leaned forward. "Those 12 men didn't die so I could destroy myself with guilt. They died doing the job they volunteered for, knowing the risks, trusting me to lead them. The dishonor isn't in surviving, it's in wasting that survival." Arya felt tears prickling at her eyes. She blinked them back. "I can't go back," she said. "I can't lead. I can't make those decisions anymore. I can't watch more people die because of my choices." "Then don't lead," Brennan said simply. "But don't hide either. What you did tonight in that trauma bay, that was you being who you really are. A healer, a protector, someone with the skills and courage to act when others freeze." Before Arya could respond, his radio crackled to life. "Colonel Brennan, we have a situation in the ER. Armed men entering through the main entrance. 6 hostiles, tactical gear, weapons visible. Security is attempting to—" The transmission cut off with the sound of gunfire. Brennan was on his feet instantly, moving toward the door with a speed that belied his age and limp. Arya followed, her training overriding everything else. They reached the corridor in time to see people running, screaming. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the building. Short, controlled bursts. Professional. Military. Through the chaos, Arya caught sight of them. 6 men in black tactical gear, no unit patches, no identifying marks. They moved through the ER like they owned it, weapons raised, faces covered by balaclavas. And at their center, directing them with hand signals, was a man who made Arya's blood run cold. Tall, lean, with cold gray eyes visible through his balaclava. Even from a distance, even with his face partially covered, she recognized the way he moved, the way he commanded. Marcus Reaver Kane, former CIA paramilitary operations officer, now a mercenary who sold his skills to the highest bidder. She had encountered him once before, during an operation in Syria. He had been on the other side then too, working for a warlord the U.S. had been trying to eliminate. The mission had ended badly. Civilians caught in crossfire, intelligence compromised, her team barely making it out alive. And now he was here, in her hospital. Behind Kane, another figure emerged from the entrance. Older, in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had never smiled. He wore an expensive suit instead of tactical gear, but something about him radiated danger. Brennan's entire body went rigid beside her. "Volkov," he breathed, and Arya heard genuine shock in his voice. "That's impossible. He died in Berlin. 1989. "Who?" Arya asked, though she was already pulling Brennan back, away from the sightlines, into cover. "Dmitry Volkov. KGB. I ran an operation against him in East Berlin during the Cold War. We thought we killed him when the wall came down." Brennan's hand went to his hip, where a weapon would have been if he were still carrying. "If he's alive, if he's here," Kane's voice boomed through the ER, amplified by the hospital's PA system that someone had obviously hacked. "Attention St. Michael VA Hospital. We're looking for a patient who arrived by military helicopter approximately 30 minutes ago. A CIA analyst named Frank Dawson. You're going to bring him to us. Now." A pause. "We've also heard an interesting rumor that someone called Valkyrie is working at this hospital. A ghost from Afghanistan who's supposed to be dead." Kane's voice carried a note of dark amusement. "If that's true, Valkyrie, you should know, we're here for you too." Arya's heart hammered in her chest. They knew. Somehow they knew she was here. Volkov's accented voice came through the speakers next, heavily Russian but precise. "Colonel Tobias Brennan, I know you're here as well. 40 years I've waited for this moment. 40 years since you destroyed my family in Berlin. Today, I settle that debt." Brennan's face had gone pale. Arya looked at him, then back toward the ER where Kane's men were setting up positions, taking hostages, securing the building with professional efficiency. "How many people in there?" she asked quietly. "When I left the security office 10 minutes ago, at least 52, patients and staff. 52 civilians against 6 armed mercenaries who knew exactly what they were doing. The math was brutally simple. "We need to call the police," Brennan said, reaching for his phone. Arya's hands shot out and stopped him. "They'll have jamming equipment. Standard procedure for an operation like this. And even if we could call out, police response time is what? 15 minutes minimum? 20, Brennan admitted. These people will be dead in 10. They looked at each other, operator to operator, both knowing what had to be done, both understanding the cost. The armory, Brennan said quietly, in the basement. From when this building was a CIA safe house during the Cold War, I kept it maintained, just in case. What have you got? Enough. They moved. The basement of St. Michael V hospital smelled like old concrete in forgotten spaces. Brennan led Arya through a maze of corridors that few staff members even knew existed, past boiler rooms and storage areas marked with faded Cold War-era signage. His limp was more pronounced now as they hurried down the stairs, but he moved with purpose, ingrained instinct guiding him through territory he had secured decades ago. They reached a heavy steel door painted the same institutional beige as everything else. To anyone else, it would look like just another maintenance closet. But Arya could see the reinforced frame, the subtle signs of a security system that had been carefully maintained despite its age. Brennan punched a code into a keypad hidden behind a panel. The lock disengaged with a solid thunk. Inside, the room was small, maybe 12 by 12 feet, but it was stocked like a professional armory. 4 M4A1 carbines hung on the wall, each with EOTech holographic sights and tactical lights. 2 Remington 700 sniper rifles in .308 caliber. 1 Barrett M8250 caliber anti-materiel rifle. Boxes of ammunition stacked neatly on shelves. Plate carriers with level 4 ceramic plates. Communications equipment. Medical supplies. Everything maintained in climate-controlled storage, ready for immediate deployment. Arya felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't just a cache of weapons. This was a complete tactical package, maintained by someone who understood that preparation wasn't paranoia, it was survival. "How long have you been keeping this ready?" she asked quietly. "Since 1975, Brennan said, already pulling down one of the M4s and checking its action with practiced efficiency. This building was a CIA safe house during the height of the Cold War. Surgeries for assets who couldn't go to regular hospitals, debriefing rooms, interrogation facilities, the works. When it was decommissioned in '91, most of the equipment was supposed to be removed. He ejected the magazine, checked it was loaded, slammed it back home with a metallic click that echoed in the small space. I made sure some of it wasn't. Arya moved to the wall, her hands reaching for a plate carrier with the automatic familiarity of someone who had donned tactical gear hundreds of times. The weight of it was familiar, grounding. She checked the ceramic plates, still good, within their rated lifespan. "Why?" she asked as she began strapping on the carrier. "Why keep all this operational for 40 years? Brennan looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she recognized. The look of someone who had seen too much to ever feel truly safe again. "Because men like Volkov never really die," he said quietly. "They just wait. And I learned a long time ago that the difference between living and dying is often just preparation and luck. I couldn't control luck, but I could control preparation." He pulled down the second M4 and held it out to her. "Your weapon, Captain." Arya took it. The weight was perfect. She performed a functions check with movements so automatic they were almost meditative. Magazine out, chamber clear, sight alignment, trigger pull. Everything was in perfect working order. She looked at Brennan, really looked at him. This man who had spent 40 years maintaining an armory in a hospital basement, just in case the past came calling, who had recognized her for what she was and said nothing, giving her the space to heal in her own time. "You knew this day would come," she said. "That's why you didn't expose me. You were waiting to see if I'd be ready when it did." Brennan's expression was unreadable. "I recognized a broken operator trying to find peace. I've been that operator. I gave you the space you needed. But I also knew that eventually you'd have to choose, keep hiding or remember who you really are. He began loading magazines into the pouches on his own plate carrier with movements that were slower than they once were, but still competent. The question is, Captain Blackwell, have you made that choice? Arya looked down at the M4 in her hands, at the tactical gear she was now wearing, at the transformation she could feel happening inside herself. Like a door she'd kept locked for 2 years was finally being opened. She thought about Kara Sullivan, about the 8 operators who died in Afghanistan, about the guilt she'd carried like a stone in her chest. But she also thought about the SEAL upstairs in surgery, about Hawk and his team, about Torres and Jessica, and even Sterling, about the 52 innocent people being held hostage by men who killed for money. They're going to execute hostages, she said quietly. Kane doesn't make empty threats. If we don't move fast, people are going to die. I know. Brennan chambered around in his M4, the sound crisp and final. So what's the play, Captain? You were SEAL Team 3. Close quarters battle is your specialty. I'm 68 years old with a bad knee. You're going to have to lead on this one. There it was, the weight of command settling back on her shoulders like an old coat she'd hung up, but never really thrown away. Arya closed her eyes for a moment, took a breath. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression. The vulnerability was still there, but it was layered now with something harder. Something that had been forged in fire and blood, and the kind of decisions that left scars on the soul. Rules of engagement? She asked. This is Texas, Brennan said. Castle doctrine applies. We're protecting innocent life against armed intruders committing felonies. Lethal force is authorized. Arya nodded slowly. 6 hostiles that we know of, possibly more outside. They'll have positioned themselves to cover the entrances and maintain control of the hostage population. Standard terror cell tactics, maximum fear, minimum exposure. She moved to a table and pulled out a hospital floor plan that was stored with the equipment. Her finger traced the layout. ER, main entrance here, trauma bays here, waiting room here. They'll have concentrated hostages in the waiting room, easiest to control, good sight lines, multiple exits they can watch. Kane will position himself somewhere with oversight, probably the second-floor walkway that overlooks the ER. Volkov will stay mobile or secured in a defensive position. Brennan watched her work, saw the tactical mind engaging, the years of training reasserting themselves. Our advantages, Arya continued. We know the building. We have surprise. They think they're dealing with soft targets. We have superior positioning knowledge and can move through areas they won't expect. Our disadvantages, we're 2 against 6 minimum. They have hostages we can't risk, and we don't know their full strength or objective beyond Dawson and revenge. She looked up at Brennan. We can't win this by force. We need to divide them, separate the hostiles from the hostages, create opportunities for precision engagement. I need to know what other assets we have. The building's emergency protocols, Brennan said. I designed them. There's a tunnel system in the basement, old escape routes from the Cold War era. They connect to the parking garage, the medical building next door, and an exit 2 blocks away. The entrances are hidden, marked only in the original blueprints. Can we evacuate civilians through there? If we can get them to the access points without being spotted. The nearest one to the ER is in the old radiology department, decommissioned last year. It's storage now. Arya's mind was racing through possibilities, scenarios, tactical solutions. This was what she had been trained for, what she was good at, what she had spent 2 years trying to forget. Here's what we do, she said, her voice taking on that battlefield authority again, but different now, tempered with experience and the hard-won knowledge that every decision carried weight. Phase 1, we evacuate as many civilians as possible through the tunnel system, quietly, small groups, get them clear of the immediate danger. Phase 2, we gather intelligence. I need to know exact hostile positions, their equipment, their command structure. Kane's running the tactical side, but Volkov's the one calling shots. We need to understand what they actually want. Phase 3, we create an opportunity to separate hostiles from hostages. Distraction, misdirection, whatever works. Then we engage. Precision shots. No collateral damage. Brennan nodded slowly. And if it goes wrong, if they start executing hostages before we can act? Arya's expression hardened. Then we switch to direct action and accept the casualties. But I don't plan on letting it get that far. She pulled down one of the Remington 700s, checked the scope alignment, grabbed a box of .308 match-grade ammunition. I'll take overwatch positions when possible. You coordinate civilian evac. We stay in radio contact, move in phases, and we don't engage unless we have clean shots or no other choice. She looked at him directly. Can you still shoot, Colonel? Brennan's smile was grim. Captain, I qualified expert marksman when you were still in diapers. Bad knee doesn't affect trigger pull. Then let's move. They geared up in silence, plate carriers secured, weapons loaded and ready, spare magazines distributed, communications equipment checked. It had been 2 years since Arya had done this, but the routine was so ingrained that it felt like coming home. Except this time, there was no team, no backup, no extraction plan if things went wrong. Just her and a 68-year-old retired Delta operator against professional mercenaries who had already demonstrated they were willing to kill. As she checked her gear one final time, her hand brushed against the elastic band on her wrist, the one she'd been using as a coping mechanism for 2 years. She pulled it off and dropped it in the trash. No more pretending, no more hiding. For better or worse, Valkyrie was back. They moved through the basement corridors with tactical discipline, weapons at low ready, clearing corners, using hand signals when possible. Brennan's limp was still there, but he moved with surprising speed and efficiency, decades of training overriding physical limitations. They reached the access point nearest to the ER, a maintenance corridor that connected to the old radiology department. Through the walls, they could hear muffled sounds, crying, shouting, the harsh bark of orders given in accented English. Arya held up a fist. Stop. Brennan halted immediately. She pointed to her ear, then gestured forward. Listen first. They crept closer to a ventilation grate that opened into the ER waiting room. Through the narrow slits, Arya could see the situation. The waiting room had been converted into a holding area. Approximately 40 people, patients, nurses, doctors, visitors, were huddled together in the center of the room, surrounded by overturned chairs and scattered medical equipment. 2 of Kane's mercenaries stood guard, weapons ready, faces hidden behind balaclavas. Kane himself stood on the second-floor walkway, exactly where Arya had predicted. He held a radio in one hand and a suppressed pistol in the other. His tactical gear was top tier, the kind of equipment that cost thousands of dollars and marked him as a true professional. And next to him, surveying the chaos below with cold satisfaction, was Dmitry Volkov. Up close, even through the grate, Arya could see he was in his mid-50s. Silver hair, sharp features, eyes like chips of Arctic ice. He wore an expensive suit that seemed grotesquely out of place in the hospital setting, but he carried himself with the confidence of someone who had orchestrated violence on a grand scale and never faced consequences. Bring me the CIA analyst, Volkov was saying into a radio, and find this Valkyrie. She's here somewhere. I can feel it. Kane responded without looking at him. My men are sweeping the upper floors now. If she's in the building, we'll find her. See that you do. Volkov's accent was thick, Russian vowels coloring every word. 40 years I've waited to settle accounts with Brennan. His protege will make excellent bait. So that was it. Arya felt the pieces clicking together. This wasn't just about Dawson, the CIA analyst. This was personal. Volkov wanted revenge on Brennan for something that happened during the Cold War, and he was willing to slaughter dozens of innocent people to get it. She pulled back from the grate, gesturing for Brennan to follow her deeper into the maintenance corridor. Did you hear? She whispered. Every word. Brennan's expression was grim. This is about Berlin, 1989. I ran an op to extract a KGB defector. Volkov's father was the KGB general in charge of stopping us. The extraction went bad. Volkov Sr. was killed. His family was disgraced, purged from the party. And now he wants payback. With interest. Brennan checked his watch. Question is, how do we use that to our advantage? Arya thought for a moment, tactical options running through her mind like code. He wants you, wants me. That means he won't start executing hostages immediately. We're too valuable as objectives. But once Kane's men finish their sweep and don't find us, that calculation changes. How long do we have? 20 minutes, maybe 30 if we're lucky. Not enough time to evacuate everyone through the tunnels. No, Arya's jaw tightened. But enough time to get the most vulnerable out. Children, elderly, critical patients. She pulled out her phone, hoping the jamming equipment Kane's team was using wasn't sophisticated enough to block internal hospital communications. She was right. The phone showed local Wi-Fi connection. She opened the hospital's internal messaging system and typed quickly, Torres, this is Blackwell. Emergency Protocol Alpha. Tunnel system accessible through old radiology storage room basement level. Evacuate vulnerable patients now. Move quietly. Stay low. Delete this message after reading. She hit send, then powered down the phone. Even if Kane's team was monitoring, the message would appear as routine hospital communication, easily lost in the chaos. Now we wait, she said quietly. Give Torres 10 minutes to start the evac, then we make our move. Brennan settled against the wall, weapon across his lap. You know this is a one-way trip if we're not careful. Even if we stop Kane's team, Volkov's the type to have backup plans. I know. And you're still willing to do this? You could walk away, use the tunnels yourself, disappear again. No one would blame you. Arya thought about that. 2 years ago, she would have taken that option, would have run, hidden, found another hospital in another city where she could bury herself in anonymity. But that person, the broken operator who couldn't face her own reflection, wasn't who she was anymore. Maybe she'd never really been that person. Maybe she'd just been hiding until something forced her to remember. Kara wouldn't run, she said quietly. The 8 operators who died in Afghanistan, they wouldn't run. They'd fight. They'd protect the innocent even if it cost them everything. She looked at Brennan. I spent 2 years dishonoring their memory by hiding from who I am. I'm done with that. If I die today, at least I die as Valkyrie, not as some scared nurse pretending to be helpless. Brennan nodded slowly. Your friend, the one who died in Afghanistan, what was her name? Kara Sullivan. Best spotter I ever worked with. Best friend I ever had. She'd be proud of you right now. Arya felt tears prickling at her eyes but blinked them back. There would be time for grief later. Or there wouldn't. Either way, right now she had a job to do. Her phone buzzed once, a reply from Torres. Message received. Beginning evac now. Be safe. She showed it to Brennan, then deleted both messages and removed the battery from the phone. He's moving. That gives us our window. They repositioned to a point where they could observe the ER without being spotted. Through the grate, Arya watched Torres move with surprising calm through the chaos. He approached one of the hostages, an elderly woman in a wheelchair, and spoke quietly to her. Then, using the confusion and the guard's momentary inattention, he began wheeling her toward the old radiology corridor. One of Kane's mercenaries noticed. Hey, where are you taking her? Torres didn't miss a beat. She's diabetic, needs her insulin from the pharmacy or she'll go into shock. You want a dead hostage? The mercenary hesitated, clearly uncertain. He spoke into his radio, waited for a response. Finally, he waved Torres on. Make it quick. And you, he grabbed a nurse. Go with him. You try anything, you both die. Torres nodded, keeping his expression neutral. He wheeled the elderly woman away, the nurse following. Arya watched them disappear down the corridor toward the old radiology department. One safe, 51 to go. Over the next 15 minutes, Torres made 3 more trips. A child with asthma, a patient with a chest tube who couldn't be moved to the floor. Each time with a plausible medical excuse. Each time reducing the number of hostages. Kane's men were getting suspicious, but they didn't understand hospital operations well enough to know what was normal and what wasn't. And Volkov, secure in his position on the second floor, was too focused on finding Brennan and Arya to pay attention to the small movements below. It was the kind of advantage you got when your enemy underestimated you. And Arya intended to exploit it fully. But then the situation changed. One of Kane's mercenaries came running into the ER, speaking rapidly in Russian to Volkov. Arya's Russian was limited, but she caught enough to understand. They'd found Dawson. The CIA analyst was in recovery from surgery, still groggy from anesthesia. They were bringing him down now. And they'd found something else. Information from the hospital's computer system. Records showing that Arya Blackwell had been working here for 8 months. Volkov's face lit up with cruel satisfaction. He switched to English, his voice booming through the PA system. "Captain Blackwell, I know you're listening. I know you're here in this building. You have 5 minutes to surrender yourself, or I will execute one hostage every 60 seconds until you do." He gestured to one of his mercenaries who grabbed a nurse at random, Sarah from Pediatrics, the one who had watched Arya drop medication cups and laughed. She screamed as she was dragged forward, forced to her knees. "Starting now," Volkov said calmly. He checked his watch. Arya's heart hammered in her chest. 4 minutes and counting until an innocent woman died because she refused to surrender. Brennan looked at her. "Your call, Captain." Arya's mind raced through options. She could surrender, but that wouldn't save the hostages. It would just give Volkov what he wanted before he killed everyone anyway. She could try to take a shot from here, but the angle was wrong, and the risk of hitting Sarah was too high. Or she could do what she did best, what she'd been trained for, what Kara Sullivan had died believing she could do. She could be Valkyrie. "Change of plans," she said quietly. "I'm going to show myself. Create a distraction. When I do, you take the shot." "What shot?" Arya pointed through the grate to the second floor where Kane stood next to Volkov. "Kane's the tactical commander. Take him out. Their coordination falls apart. Can you make that shot from here?" Brennan looked at the angle, the distance, the narrow opening in the grate. It was maybe 70 meters with multiple obstructions and a target that would only be exposed for seconds. "It's a hell of a shot," he admitted. "Can you make it?" Brennan's expression hardened with a kind of determination that had kept him alive through 4 decades of the most dangerous operations in American military history. "Give me the distraction, Captain. I'll make the shot." Arya checked her M4 one final time, took a deep breath, felt the transformation complete itself inside her chest, the final shedding of the frightened nurse persona, the full embrace of who she really was. She stepped out of the maintenance corridor and into the ER waiting room. Every weapon in the room swung toward her. "I'm Captain Arya Blackwell," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Call sign Valkyrie. SEAL Team 3. You want me? Here I am." Volkov's smile was predatory. "At last! The ghost made flesh. Drop your weapon, Captain. Let the hostages go first. You're not in a position to negotiate. Neither are you." Arya's voice was ice cold. "You think you're the first terrorist I've faced? You think this is the first time I've had to decide between my life and innocence? I've been making that calculation since I was 23 years old, and I'm very good at it." She raised her M4 slightly, not quite pointing it at Volkov, but making the threat clear. "So here's how this goes. You let the hostages walk, all of them, and then you and I can settle whatever vendetta you think you have." Volkov laughed. "You have courage. I'll grant you that, but courage without leverage is just stupidity." He nodded to Kane. "Kill her." Kane's weapon came up, and Brennan took the shot. The sound of the rifle was impossibly loud in the enclosed space. A sharp crack that echoed off the walls and ceiling. Kane jerked backward, a red flower blooming in the center of his chest, where the .308 round punched through his tactical vest. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. For one frozen moment, everyone in the room stared in shock. Then chaos erupted. Volkov was screaming orders in Russian. His mercenaries were spinning, trying to find the shooter. Hostages were scattering, running for cover, and Arya was moving. She dropped to one knee, brought her M4 up, and fired 3 controlled shots at the nearest mercenary. Center mass, professional grouping. He went down hard. Another mercenary was turning toward her, but she was faster. 2 shots, head and chest. He collapsed. Brennan emerged from the maintenance corridor, his M4 speaking in short, precise bursts. Another mercenary down. 3 hostiles neutralized in less than 5 seconds, but that left 3 more, plus Volkov. And they were professionals. They scattered to cover, laying down suppressive fire that forced Arya to dive behind an overturned gurney. Rounds punched through the thin metal, missing her by inches. She rolled, came up behind a concrete pillar, returned fire. The tactical training was automatic now, her body moving with ingrained combat instinct. Brennan had taken cover behind the nurse's station, engaging targets with careful precision. His age showed in his movements. He was slower than he once was, the bad knee affecting his mobility, but his shooting was still surgical. Another mercenary down. 2 left plus Volkov. But Volkov wasn't staying to fight. He was moving toward the exit, using the chaos as cover, clearly intending to escape and let his remaining men cover his retreat. Arya saw him moving and made a decision. She broke cover, sprinting across the open floor toward the stairs that would let her cut him off. Bullets tracked her movement, one round so close she felt the supersonic crack as it passed her ear. She hit the stairs and took them 3 at a time, her breath coming in controlled gasps, her legs burning with the effort. She reached the 2nd floor just as Volkov was pushing through the door to the external fire escape. "Volkov!" she shouted. "It's over!" He spun, and suddenly there was a pistol in his hand, a compact 9mm that he aimed with professional competence at her center mass. They stood there, weapons trained on each other, both knowing that whoever shot first would probably win. "You've cost me everything," Volkov said, his voice shaking with rage. "Brennan destroyed my family. You destroyed my operations, my reputation, my fortune. You destroyed yourself," Arya said quietly, "by choosing revenge over reason, by killing innocent people to settle old scores. Sentiment from a killer." Volkov's laugh was bitter. "How many have you killed, Captain Blackwell? How many deaths weigh on your conscience?" "Enough," Arya admitted. "More than enough. But the difference between you and me? I killed to protect. You killed for profit, in spite." Her finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance. Drop the weapon." Volkov's eyes narrowed. For a moment she thought he might actually comply. Then he smiled. "If I die, you die with me." His finger moved on the trigger. Arya fired first. The round caught Volkov in the right shoulder, spinning him around. His shot went wide, punching into the ceiling. He stumbled backward, the pistol falling from his grip. Arya advanced, weapon trained on him, ready to fire again if needed. But it wasn't needed. Volkov collapsed against the wall, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping through his expensive suit. "It's over," Arya said. "You're done." Sirens were audible now. Police, FBI, maybe even military response given the presence of the SEALs. The cavalry was coming, too late to help, but in time to clean up. Arya kept her weapon on Volkov as she keyed her radio. "Brennan, status?" "2 hostiles down," his voice came back slightly breathless. "Last one surrendered when he saw Volkov go down. Hostages are secure. We're clear." "Copy. I have Volkov in custody. He's wounded but alive." She looked down at the man who had come here seeking revenge. who had been willing to murder dozens of innocent people to settle a 40-year-old grudge. Was it worth it? She asked quietly. Volkov looked up at her, blood on his lips, defeat in his eyes. Ask me that question in 40 years, he said, when the ghosts of your dead still haunt you, when the choices you made still wake you screaming. Then tell me what's worth it. Arya thought about Kara Sullivan, about the 8 operators from Afghanistan, about all the death and loss and guilt she'd carried for 2 years. The difference, she said softly, is that I'm trying to honor my dead by protecting the living. You're dishonoring yours by creating more corpses. She pressed the radio on her vest. This is Captain Arya Blackwell, call sign Valkyrie. Situation is contained. Requesting immediate medical and law enforcement response. The reply came within seconds. FBI tactical teams were entering the building now. It was over. Arya sat down on the stairs, sudden exhaustion washing over her. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the shakes, the clarity of post-combat awareness. She just fought her first engagement in 2 years, had just proven to herself that she could still do it, that the skills hadn't atrophied, that Valkyrie wasn't dead. But she'd also proven something else, something more important, that she could choose when to fight, that she didn't have to be a warrior every moment, that the person she'd become in her time as Arya Blackwell, the caregiver, the healer, wasn't a lie or a disguise. It was part of who she was, too. Brennan found her there a few minutes later. He was favoring his bad knee heavily now, the adrenaline no longer masking the pain, but he was grinning. Hell of a fight, Captain, he said. Hell of a shot, Colonel. 70 meters through a ventilation grate. I've seen easier. He sat down next to her on the stairs, both of them suddenly just 2 tired operators who'd survived another day. You know they're going to have questions, he said. FBI, military investigators, probably half the alphabet soup agencies in Washington. I know. Your cover's blown. Can't go back to being invisible now. I know that too. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. What are you going to do? Brennan finally asked. Arya thought about it. About the life she'd built in hiding. About the life she'd left behind. About the person she was and the person she'd been pretending to be. I'm going to tell the truth, she said finally. All of it. Why I disappeared. What happened in Afghanistan. Who I really am. She looked at Brennan. And then I'm going to figure out how to be both people, Valkyrie and Arya, the warrior and the healer, because I think maybe that's who I was supposed to be all along. Brennan nodded slowly. That sounds like wisdom. Hard-earned, but wisdom nonetheless. FBI agents were swarming the ER now, securing the scene, tending to the hostages. Torres appeared through the chaos, his face splitting into a relieved smile when he saw Arya. Blackwell, thank God. I got 23 people out through the tunnels before everything went to hell. Are you? He stopped, taking in her tactical gear, the weapon. What am I saying? Of course you're okay. You're whoever you really are. I'm Arya Blackwell, she said with a small smile. Navy SEAL, combat medic, and apparently still a pretty decent nurse when I'm not being shot at. Through the chaos, Arya spotted movement in the medication room. Dr. Sterling, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and urgent. Please, Mr. Volkov, you promised if I helped, you'd let her go. My daughter, she's only 8 years old. I've done everything you asked, disabled the panic alarms, gave you the building layouts, told you when the SEALs would arrive. Arya's blood ran cold. Sterling. It had been Sterling all along. She moved closer, weapon ready. Sterling spun, saw her, and the phone clattered from his hand. His face crumpled. They have Emma, he whispered, broken. They have my little girl. Volkov sent me a photo 3 days ago, her tied to a chair, crying. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd... His voice broke. What would you have done, Captain? What would you have done if it was someone you loved? Arya lowered her weapon slightly. Where is she? Volkov's warehouse, 15 miles north. He showed me on a map. Sterling's hands were shaking. I know what I did was unforgivable, but she's my daughter. Give me the address, Arya said. FBI will send a team. She radioed the information to the FBI agents securing the building. Within minutes, a tactical team was dispatched. Sterling sank to his knees, sobbing. Over the next several hours, Arya gave her statement to what felt like a dozen different agencies. FBI, Naval Criminal Investigative Service, JSOC representatives. Each time she told the same story: who she was, why she disappeared, what had happened tonight. And each time she felt a little more of the weight she'd been carrying lift off her shoulders. The FBI tactical team found Emma Sterling alive, frightened but unharmed, in Volkov's warehouse. When they brought her to the hospital, Sterling held his daughter and wept. He would face charges: conspiracy, aiding and abetting, endangering lives. But he'd also helped save 23 people by cooperating with Torres's evacuation plan. Justice, Arya thought, wasn't always simple. 2 days after the hospital siege, Hawk found her in the VA cafeteria. He was in dress uniform, full navy whites, which meant Nomad surgery had gone well enough for official visits. Captain, he said, standing at attention. At ease, Rivers. And it's just Arya now. Or Blackwell, if we're being formal. He sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two operators who'd seen too much, but somehow survived. Nomad's awake, Hawk said, asking for the nurse who saved his life. When I told him it was Valkyrie, he shook his head, grinning. Man wanted to re-enlist just to serve under you again. Arya felt her throat tighten. How is he really? He'll make it. Full recovery expected. Because of you. Hawk's expression grew serious. Team wanted me to ask, you ever decide to come back to operational status? SEAL Team 3 has a slot with your name on it. Always will. I appreciate that, but I think my fighting days are behind me, at least the kind that involves downrange deployments. Understood. He stood, offered his hand. Semper Fi, Valkyrie. Wrong branch, she said with a small smile, shaking his hand, but I'll take it. You earned it. He paused at the door. Fair winds and following seas, Captain, wherever you go. After he left, Arya sat alone for a long moment, staring at her coffee. That was closure. That was goodbye to the old life. It was time to build the new one. 3 days later, Arya sat in a conference room at the Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, California. Across from her sat a 2-star admiral, the commander of all SEAL operations. Next to him was a JSOC representative. Captain Blackwell, the admiral said, your actions 3 nights ago saved 52 lives. The FBI has confirmed that Volkov's organization was planning a multi-state terror operation, and the intelligence you helped secure by capturing him alive has already prevented 3 additional attacks. He paused. Your service record prior to Afghanistan was exemplary. Your conduct during what we now know was an unsanctioned leave of absence was understandable, given the circumstances. The question now is, what happens next? Arya took a deep breath. Sir, with respect, I'm not ready to return to active combat operations. I've spent 2 years processing the trauma of losing my team, and while I'm better than I was, I'm not where I need to be to lead men and women into harm's way. She saw disappointment flash across the admiral's face, but she pressed on. However, I would like to propose an alternative. The VA hospital where I was working, they need someone who understands both medicine and the veteran experience, who can train staff in handling PTSD, in recognizing combat trauma, in providing care that acknowledges what these men and women have been through. She looked directly at the admiral. I'd like to request assignment as a liaison between Naval Special Warfare and the VA system, training medical staff, developing programs for transitioning operators, helping active duty SEALs understand their medical benefits and support options. I can serve without being on the front lines. The Admiral considered this for a long moment. That's not a traditional career path for someone of your rank and qualifications. No, sir, but I think it's where I can do the most good right now. The JSOC representative nodded. There's precedent for this kind of assignment, and frankly, Captain Blackwell's unique experience makes her ideal for the role. The Admiral tapped his fingers on the table, thinking. Finally, he nodded. Very well. Consider yourself assigned to Naval Special Warfare Command as medical liaison to the VA system, effective immediately. You'll maintain your rank and security clearance. You'll train, you'll develop programs, and you'll help our people transition. But Captain, his expression grew stern, if we need you in the field again, if there's a situation where your specific skills are required, I expect you to answer that call. Arya thought about that, about the weight of command, the responsibility, the cost. Then she thought about the 52 people she'd helped save, about Volkov being brought to justice, about the good that could come from her experience. Yes, sir, she said quietly. If you need Valkyrie, I'll answer. The funeral was small. Sterling's ex-wife attended, hollow-eyed. His daughter Emma, rescued from Volkov's safe house by FBI, sat beside her mother, clutching a teddy bear. Arya stood in the back, in civilian clothes, watching as they lowered the casket. Sterling had died 3 days after the siege, a heart attack, the doctor said, stress-induced. His body had simply given out under the weight of what he'd done. After the service, Emma approached her, 8 years old, blonde pigtails, eyes too old for her age. My daddy said you were a hero, the girl said quietly. He said you tried to save everyone, even him. Arya knelt down, eye level with the child. Your daddy loved you very much. Everything he did because he wanted to protect you. That's not wrong. That's what parents do. Will you remember him? Emma asked. Not the bad stuff, the good stuff? Arya thought about Sterling, arrogant, cruel, broken by impossible choices. Human. I will, she promised. I'll remember that he was a good doctor who made a terrible choice because he loved his daughter. And in the end, he tried to make it right. Emma nodded, satisfied, and returned to her mother. Arya stayed until everyone else had left, standing alone by the grave. I hope you found peace, Preston, she said quietly. And I hope Emma remembers you the way you wanted to be remembered. Then she walked away, leaving the past behind. 6 months later, Arya stood in front of a classroom at the VA hospital in Fort Worth. The room was filled with nurses, doctors, and medical staff. Some of them the same people who had watched her drop medication cups and thought she was incompetent. Torres sat in the front, Jessica and Diane Mitchell scattered throughout. My name is Captain Arya Blackwell, she said. Some of you knew me as the clumsy night shift nurse who couldn't keep her hands steady. What you didn't know was that I was Captain Arya Blackwell, Navy SEAL, call sign Valkyrie. She clicked to the next slide, a photo of her SEAL team taken 2 years ago in Afghanistan. Young faces, confident smiles, unaware of the tragedy coming. 2 years ago, I lost 8 members of my team in an IED attack, including my best friend and spotter, Lieutenant Kara Sullivan. Her voice caught slightly, but she pushed through. I blamed myself, hid from my past, pretended to be someone I wasn't because I couldn't face who I really was. Another slide, this one showing the statistics, veteran suicide rates, PTSD diagnoses, the epidemic of mental health crises among returning service members. But I learned something in those 2 years. The patients we treat here aren't just bodies with injuries. They're warriors dealing with wounds we can't see, trauma that doesn't show up on x-rays. And if we don't understand that, if we don't treat the whole person, we fail them just as surely as if we'd botched the surgery. She looked around the room. I'm here to teach you what I learned. How to recognize combat trauma, how to communicate with veterans who don't trust easily, how to create an environment where healing, real healing, body and mind, can happen. She smiled slightly. And I promise this time I won't drop anything. The room erupted in surprised laughter. After the presentation, Torres approached her. That was powerful, Captain. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for helping evacuate those civilians, Arya said. You saved lives that night. So did you, he paused. Can I ask you something? That elastic band you used to wear, the one you were always snapping, was that grounding technique, Arya confirmed, for when the PTSD got bad, when I felt myself slipping into combat mode and needed to remember where I was. Do you still need it? Arya thought about that, about the nightmares that still came sometimes, about the moments when she heard a helicopter and her chest tightened, about the grief that would probably never fully fade. Sometimes, she admitted, but less often now. Turns out the best way to deal with trauma isn't to hide from it. It's to face it head on and find purpose in what you learned. That evening, Arya drove to the cemetery. She walked through the rows of white headstones until she found the one she was looking for. Lieutenant Kara Sullivan, United States Navy, died in service to her country. Arya knelt down, placing a single flower on the grave. The same ritual she'd performed every month for the past 6 months since coming out of hiding. Hey, Kara, she said quietly, fingers tracing the engraved letters of her friend's name. Remember how you always said I was too hard on myself? That I needed to forgive my mistakes? A sad smile touched her lips. Took me 2 years, but I'm finally listening. The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere, a bird called. I'm teaching now, helping other medics understand what we went through, making sure they're better prepared than we were, making sure no one else loses their spotter because the team leader was too stubborn to ask for better intel. She stood, placing one hand on the headstone. I'm not going to lie and say I'm okay. Some days are still hard. Some nights I still wake up screaming. But I'm doing the work. I'm honoring you and the others the best way I know how, by making sure their sacrifice meant something. I'll never forget you, Kara. None of you. But I'm learning to live with the loss, to be both Valkyrie and Arya, the warrior and the healer. She saluted, holding it for a long moment. Then she walked back to her car, where Brennan was waiting. He'd become a mentor in truth now, guiding her through the process of building the Veteran Liaison Program, sharing his own experiences with loss and recovery. Ready? He asked. Ready, she confirmed. They had a meeting with JSOC representatives tomorrow. Another veteran hospital wanted to implement the training program Arya had developed. Her calendar was filling up with speaking engagements, training sessions, consultations. Valkyrie had found a new mission, not in combat, but in healing, not in taking lives, but in saving them, including her own. As they drove away from the cemetery, Arya looked back one last time at the rows of white headstones, at the sacrifice represented there, at the cost of service that she understood better than most, and she made a silent promise to all of them. I'll make it count. Every day, every veteran I help, every life I touch, your deaths won't be meaningless. I'll make sure of that. The sun was setting over Fort Worth, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was beautiful, peaceful, and for the first time in 2 years, Arya Blackwell could appreciate it without guilt. She was Valkyrie, she was Arya, she was both, and she was finally, truly home.